Welcome to Photographiliac. I am your host, B. Smitty. Today we're going back to 1950, a Kodak camera, and a UFO. I just want to start off this podcast episode by thanking everyone for tuning in. I appreciate it. So today we're going to talk about the McMinnville UFO photographs. Photos taken by Paul Trent. His wife Evelyn had seen the UFO as well in McMinnville, Oregon in May 1950. According to astronomer William K. Hartman, at 7:30 p.m., Evelyn Trent was walking back to her farmhouse after feeding her caged rabbits. Before reaching the house, she noticed a slow-moving, metallic disc-shaped object heading in her direction from the northeast. It'd be kind of crazy to be outside and just see something like that just flying around. I've always been intrigued by UFO stories for sure. Evelyn yelled for her husband Paul, who was inside the house. He claimed that upon leaving the house, he also saw the flying object. After watching the object for a short time, he went back inside their home to obtain a camera. He said he managed to take 2 photos of the object before it sped away to the west. Paul Trent's father also claimed he briefly viewed the object before it flew away. However, the Trents had given a slightly different version of the incident to the local McMinnville newspaper, the Telephone Register. 2 days earlier, on June 8, 1950, in that version, when Evelyn walked outside to feed her chickens, she looked up and saw what looked like a large disc silently hovering in the sky. She called for her husband Paul to bring their folding Kodak camera outside. Those things are classic. You just open it up, and I don't know, those are classic, those folding Kodak cameras. The metallic-looking object was still there when Paul emerged. He took a picture and advanced the film as fast as he could. The disc began to gain speed, so Paul quickly moved to his right for a second shot. Then he later recalled the object disappeared over the horizon with what they called a silent wind. The Trents knew 2 things. They took 2 pictures in 30 seconds. They could not identify the object in those pictures. The roll of film in Trent's camera is not entirely used up, so the Trents did not have the film developed immediately. The film was not developed until the remaining frames were used in shooting family photographs for Mother's Day, Sunday, May 14th, 1950. Yeah, that's something I would probably want to get developed right away. I think I would just fire off some shots to kind of finish up that roll. It's time to get those developed, I feel like. In a 1997 interview, the Trents claimed that they initially thought the object they had photographed was a secret military aircraft and feared, quote, photos might bring them trouble. When he mentioned his sighting back in the day and photographs to his banker, Frank Wortman, the banker was intrigued enough to display the photos from his bank window in McMinnville. Shortly afterwards, Bill Powell, a local newspaper reporter, convinced Mr. Trent to loan him the negatives. I don't know if I'd give up the negatives. I don't know. I'd kind of hold on to those. I wouldn't loan them, that's for sure. Powell examined the negatives and found no evidence that they were tampered with or faked. On June 8, 1950, Powell's story of the incident, accompanied by the 2 photos, was published as a front-page story in the McMinnville Telephone Register. The headline read, "At long last, authentic photographs of flying saucer." The story and photos were then picked up by the International News Service and sent to other newspapers around the nation, giving them wide publicity. Life magazine published cropped versions of photos on June 26, 1950, along with a photo of Trent and his camera. The Trents had been promised that the negatives would be returned to them. However, they were not returned. Of course, that's what I'm saying. Should have held on to those negatives. But you'll see what happens soon. But yeah, Life magazine told the Trents that they had misplaced the negatives. In 1967, the negatives of the Trent photos were found in the files of the United Press International, the news service which had merged with International News Service years earlier. The negatives were then loaned to Dr. William K. Hartman, who was mentioned at the beginning of this podcast episode. He was working as an investigator for the Condon Committee, a government-funded UFO research project based at the University of Colorado Boulder. The Trents were not immediately informed that their lost negatives had been found. Again, that's the thing. People are finding them, giving them to other people. It's just without telling them. It's kind of interesting. Hartman interviewed the Trents and was impressed by their sincerity. The Trents apparently never asked for any money for their photos. In Hartman's analysis, he wrote to the Condon Committee that, quote, "This is one of the few UFO reports in which all factors investigated, geometric, psychological, and physical, appeared to be consistent. That extraordinary flying object, silvery metallic dish shaped tens of meters in diameter and evidently artificial, flew within sight of two witnesses." One reason for this conclusion was due to the photometric analysis of the images. Hartman noted that the brightness of the underside of the object appeared to be lighter than the underside of the oil tank seen in the images. This could be due to the effects of atmospheric extinction and scattering, the same effects that make distant mountains appear washed out and blue. This effect suggests that the objects were further from the camera than the tank, not small local objects. Hartman did, however, also point out the possibility that the images were manufactured. He said, quote, "The object appears beneath a pair of wires, as it's seen in plates 23 and 24. We may question, therefore, whether it could have been a model suspended from those wires. This possibility is strengthened by the observation that the object appears beneath roughly the same point in the two photos, in spite of their having been taken from two positions. These tests do not rule out the possibility that the object was a small model suspended from the nearby wire by an unresolved thread." So yeah, I have the photo post. I'd like to see what your thoughts are on these photos for sure. Hartman also noticed a discrepancy that would later become the main point of objection for later skeptics. He noticed that the overall lighting of the image was consistent with lighting that would be expected around sunset. But he said, quote, "There could be possible discrepancy in view of the fact that the UFO, the telephone pole, possibly the garage at the left, and especially the distant left, is illuminated from the right or east. The house in particular appears to have a shadow under its roof that would suggest a daylit photo, and combined with eastward incidents, one could argue that photos were taken on a dull sunlit day, let's say around 10 a.m. That lighting, I've seen different things used in like courts and stuff, or people can where they just take a picture and they think this will work, but yeah, the sun lets you know what time of day it is, so that can kind of bite you. Where certain shadows and all that, that's some pretty good evidence in itself. In 1970, the Trents asked the editor of the News Register, which is the successor of the Telephone Register, for the negatives. The Trents noted that they had never been paid for the negatives, so they wanted them back. Bladine asked the UPI to return the negatives, which it did. It's interesting to note, though, for some reason, Bladine did not inform the Trents that the negatives had been returned in the first place. In 1975, the negatives were found in the files of the News Register by Bruce Maccabee. After completing his own study of the photos, Maccabee ensured that the original negatives were finally returned to the Trents. So yeah, it took that long to get the negatives back. It was 25 years. Maccabee analyzed the photos and concluded that the photographs were not hoaxed and showed a, quote, "real physical object in the sky above the Trent farm." Much of his analysis is based on measurements similar to the photometric analysis done by Hartman. Maccabee argued that the brightness of the object underside suggested it was at some distance from the camera, not a smaller object close to it. Maccabee also analyzed the position of various objects in the image, as well as an image prepared by Hartman when he visited the site in June 1967. Based on this, Maccabee argued that the line of sight of the two images intersected some distance behind the power lines seen in the photos, providing further evidence in his opinion that it was not a small model suspended from the lines. Maccabee stated that his analysis of the object did not find any evidence of a thread or string suspending it from the power lines. In the 1980s, journalists and noted UFO skeptics Philip J. Klass and Robert Schaefer stated their opinions that the photos were faked, that the entire event was a hoax. Their primary argument stated that the shadows on a garage on the left-hand side of the photos proved that the photos were taken in the morning rather than the early evening, as the Trents had claimed. Klass and Schaefer argued that since the Trents had apparently lied about the time of day the photos were taken, their entire story was suspect. This next thing is also a slight, issue. They also claimed the Trents had shown an interest in UFOs prior to their alleged sighting. Maybe their interest had turned into wanting to be a part of UFO history. It's hearsay. You don't, it's, who knows, even if you do have an interest, that doesn't, a lot of people have interest in things, and coincidences do happen. Additionally, their analysis of the photos suggested that the object photographed was small and likely a model hanging from power lines visible at the top of the photos. They also believed that the object may have been the detached side view mirror of a vehicle. The object has a shape that is very similar to the round mirrors that were used in Ford vehicles for decades. Class also claimed to have found a number of contradictions in the Trent story of the sighting, and noted that their version of the incident changed over the years. His conclusion was that the Trents had fabricated the event. Photos that were reprinted in Life magazine and in newspapers across the nation are often considered among the most famous photographs ever taken of a UFO. Evelyn Trent died in 1997, and Paul Trent died soon after in 1998, but both insisted until the end of their lives that the sighting and the photos were genuine. And that concludes this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Head over to Photographiliac.com for companion content to this podcast. Also, head over to my website, bsmitty.com, for more photography content and merch to this podcast. And if you want to support this podcast even further and get exclusive content, head over to patreon.com/bsmitty. You can find me on the social medias at OGBSmitty. All right, let's grab our camera and shoot some photos.